You probably have no trouble playing video games or looking at social media on your phone. In fact, I'm sure you could sit in front of a screen and do both for 2 hours or more without losing focus. But what about studying for half an hour? That might feel too hard. How about working on your side business for another hour? That doesn't sound very fun. Even though you know studying, exercising, building a business, or doing something productive will help you more in the long run, you still prefer watching TV, playing video games, and looking at social media. Some might say the reason is obvious. One activity is easy and doesn't need much effort, while the other is hard and requires you to try. But some people have no problem studying, exercising, or working on their side projects regularly. So, why are some people more motivated to do difficult things? And is there a way to make hard tasks easier? To answer this, we need to learn about a brain chemical called dopamine. Dopamine is often thought of as a pleasure molecule, but that's not quite right. Dopamine makes us want things. This desire gives us the motivation to get up and do stuff. If you're unsure how strong dopamine is, let me tell you about some experiments scientists did on rats. The researchers put electrodes in the brains of rats. When a rat pulled a lever, the researchers stimulated the rat's reward system in the brain. This made the rats crave the feeling so much that they kept pulling the lever for hours. They didn't eat or sleep, they just kept pressing the lever until they were too tired to continue. Then, the researchers did the opposite. They blocked the release of dopamine in the brain's reward center. The rats became so lazy that getting up for a drink of water wasn't worth the effort. They didn't eat, mate, or crave anything at all. You could say the rats lost all will to live. However, if food was put directly in their mouths, they would eat and enjoy it. They just didn't have the motivation to get it themselves. You might think thirst or hunger makes us get food or water, but dopamine plays a big role too. These rat experiments are extreme, but you can see similar effects of dopamine in humans and our daily lives. Your brain sets priorities based largely on how much dopamine it expects to get. If an activity releases too little dopamine, you won't feel motivated to do it. But if an activity releases a lot of dopamine, you'll feel motivated to keep doing it over and over. So, which activities release dopamine? Any activity where you expect a reward releases it. But if you know there are no immediate rewards, your brain won't release much dopamine. For instance, before you eat comfort food, your brain releases dopamine because you expect it to make you feel good, even if it ends up making you feel worse. Your brain doesn't care if the high dopamine activity is harmful, it just wants more of it. A classic example is someone addicted to drugs. They know it's bad for them, but they crave more of the drug. Drugs like cocaine and heroin release a lot of dopamine, making you want them even more. But almost everything releases some dopamine, even drinking water when you're thirsty. The biggest dopamine release happens when you get a reward unexpectedly. Like playing a slot machine in a casino, where you might have been losing money, but you hope for a big win, even though you don't know when it will come. In today's digital world, we're giving our brains high doses of dopamine every day, often without realizing it. Scrolling through social media, playing video games, or watching internet pornography are examples. With each of these behaviors, we expect some kind of reward. That's why we're always checking our phones. We expect to get a text message or some notification, and we know it's coming eventually. We're becoming like those rats pulling the lever, trying to get another hit of dopamine. You might think, so what? It's not harming me in any way. But you'd be mistaken. Our bodies have a system called homeostasis. It means our body likes to keep internal conditions balanced. When there's an imbalance, our body adjusts to it. For example, when it's cold, our body temperature drops, so we shiver to generate heat. When it's hot, our body temperature rises, so we sweat to cool down. Our body aims to maintain a temperature around 37 degrees Celsius or 98 degrees Fahrenheit, no matter what. Another way homeostasis shows up is through tolerance. For instance, someone who rarely drinks alcohol gets drunk quickly. But someone who drinks regularly needs more alcohol because their body has gotten used to it. It takes more alcohol to make them drunk because they become less sensitive to its effects. It's similar with dopamine. Your body aims to keep things balanced, so it decreases your dopamine receptors. Your brain gets used to high dopamine levels, and they become normal. This creates a dopamine tolerance. It's a big problem because things that don't give you much dopamine don't interest you anymore. It's harder to motivate yourself to do them. They feel boring because they don't release as much dopamine as the things you're used to. That's why people often prefer playing video games or browsing the internet over studying or working on their business. Video games make us feel good because they release a lot of dopamine, while activities like working hard or reading release less. This is why it's tough for drug addicts trying to quit. They built up a high tolerance to dopamine, so normal life doesn't feel as rewarding. They're like those rats in previous experiments, they lack motivation when there's not enough dopamine. And it's not just drug addicts. People addicted to video games, social media, or internet pornography face the same challenge. Once their dopamine tolerance is high, they struggle to enjoy activities with less dopamine. So, is there a solution? Yes, it's called a dopamine detox. You might already have an idea of what it involves. Basically, you set aside a day to avoid highly stimulating activities. You're going to give your brain a break from high levels of dopamine and let your dopamine receptors recover. But a quick note, if you're dealing with drug addiction, seek professional help to manage withdrawal symptoms. Now, onto the detox. For one whole day, you'll aim to have as little fun as possible. That means no internet, no technology like phones or computers, no music, no masturbation, and no junk food. Basically, you're cutting out all sources of external pleasure for the entire day. You'll embrace boredom, which might be tough. But you can still meditate and spend time alone with your thoughts. Reflect on your life and goals. To simplify, dopamine detox works because when you're so bored, even boring stuff becomes more enjoyable. But if you don't want to take extreme measures, you can try a smaller detox. Pick one day a week to avoid one of your high dopamine behaviors completely. It could be checking your phone constantly, playing video games, binge-watching TV, eating junk food, watching internet pornography, or anything else. Every week, for a whole day, you'll avoid that specific activity. You can still do other things, but the chosen behavior is off limits. You might feel a bit bored, but that's the idea. You're giving your dopamine receptors a chance to recover from the high dopamine levels. Boredom will push you to do other things that day, things you might normally put off, because they don't give as much dopamine. Because you're bored, it's easier to do other things. It's good to avoid high dopamine behaviors once in a while, but ideally, you should limit them as much as possible. Instead, you want to link more dopamine to things that benefit you in the long term. What I've found is that your current high dopamine activities can motivate you to pursue things that give you long-term benefits. You can use your high dopamine activity as a reward for completing difficult work. That's what I do myself. I keep track of all the hard, low dopamine work I do, like cleaning, practicing the piano, reading, exercising, or creating videos. Once I've completed a certain amount of work, I reward myself with some high dopamine activity at the end of the day. The important thing here is to do it after completing your tasks and at the end of the day. If I start with high dopamine activities, I won't feel motivated to do the low dopamine work afterward. So I always begin with the hard tasks before allowing myself to enjoy high dopamine activities. Here's an example. For every hour of difficult work I complete, I reward myself with 15 minutes of high dopamine behavior at the end of the day. This means that for every 8 hours of low dopamine work, I allow myself roughly 2 hours of high dopamine behavior. These are my personal ratios, but you can adjust them to suit you. It's important to note that if you're addicted to something harmful, don't treat that behavior as a reward. Find a different reward that's still enjoyable but not damaging to your health. My guilty pleasure is the internet. I can easily spend hours there without doing anything else. That's why I have this system. It helps me control my addiction. Even with my system, I still have days where I completely abstain from internet. In conclusion, it's possible to make difficult tasks feel easier. But when your brain is flooded with dopamine all the time, you won't feel as excited about tasks that don't release much of it. That's why limiting phone, computer, and other high dopamine activities is important. I can assure you, it's worth it. If you struggle with motivation, start detoxing your brain from dopamine as soon as possible. Reduce exposure to unnaturally high levels of dopamine, or at least make it less frequent. Only then will everyday tasks become exciting again, and you'll be able to do them for longer. We're all somewhat addicted to dopamine, which is good because it motivates us to achieve our goals and improve ourselves. But it's up to you to decide where you'll get your dopamine from. Will you seek dopamine from activities that don't benefit you, or will you work towards your long-term goals? The choice is yours. If you found this video helpful, I'd appreciate a gentle tap on the like button. It really helps my channel,